Can you see my screen? Can you can you see my screen?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, okay. Okay, so today we want to talk about databases. In our previous class, for instance, we talked about forms and then we created a form. If you can see my screen, right? Typically, when you use a form, you want to take information from people and store them somewhere that you can always retrieve them when you want. Just like when you go to sign up for something on a website, you put your email and your password, your name, your maybe phone number, and everything, and you hit enter. What tends to happen is that they take the information you put and keep it in a database. That is why tomorrow you can come back again and say sign in, put your email and password to enter. Because yes, there is a form. If you're using Flask, for instance, you could have a form just like this to pick the person's details. When you've picked the details, the question is what happens next with it. In our last class, we talked about this. We just displayed it on a page, right? On this page, you will just see the person's name, the is he saved, whatever I answered. We are just playing with form element, but you can do more. You can actually go ahead and make all these things to become data entry in a database and save it about this person. That's why we need database so that tomorrow we can come and you still have the data. When we use this session, if you come again today, you can't get the data. The data at that time was just short-lived and died. But under database, it stays there. You can come anytime, collect it, use it. So that's the part we're not talking about. How we will now move this data to our database. Now, first of all, we now to, know that the most common type of database, what we call SQL database, structured query language database, and basically it is just like storing data in rows and columns, right? Just like we have in Excel. Let me see if I can get Excel open here. Can you see my screen? So if you
Yes.
okay, yeah, thank you.
Okay.
This Excel is
And
just yeah.
there's a okay. Henry just asked a question. If we can be given assignments, at least to boost our understanding,
Mm,
maybe
For this
that will be handled after the class.
yeah, for this class, the way we design it is whatever we do, you code along, right?
Okay.
I don't have assignments to be doing, do this, do that. Just code along. As you see me do, you repeat it, right? After watching, you try to do it to achieve it on your own. That's the reason why I shared the files for the day. In case you are struggling, something did not work, right? You keep getting an error, you don't know what to do, you can message me or you can go to the GitHub location, look at the code, how it was written in class, and then what you've written. Try to see if you can see where you made a mistake and correct yourself. After we just teach the basics of Flask, we are going to together build a small application, bring all these things together, right? So if you see what we've been doing, we talk about the basics of Flask, we talk about templates. Now we're talking about, okay, we've talked about forms. Now we're talking about database, how we can get it set up, get it running, query the database. Then when you understand this one, you can then bring all this together in building a proper Flask application. Or we'll still talk about something like before we go to, okay, maybe in the large application, we'll talk about authentication. how to get users authenticated, right? How to structure an application, then we'll build a project with it. But with this now, if you can code along, you will get more understanding on how to use Flask. There is actually a book which I shared. I'm not using the book um, page by page or chapter by chapter, but if you follow that book, it's still the same thing. But you'll be reading it and doing. There are exercises in the book. The book too is about building an application. If you follow the book, in the end, you've built an application. So, okay, just try it, do it yourself. Like code along as we do, you do, and you will see you get it. Okay, so I was trying to explain to us how the database kind of looks like, and I pulled up Excel. You see that there are rows and there are columns, right? So an SQL database looks like this. You can have fields, maybe you could have titles like name, email, password. So if someone registers and his name is Joseph, so you can just have his name like an entry, and then you have his email, maybe Joseph at email.com, and then his password can just, let's just say password. So this could be like a database table, an SQL database table that just has um, three columns, and then this is the first entry. If you put a second person, it will be it will enter this side, another one will enter. Maybe let's even add one more column just to make it here, and then you could have ID. So this person's ID is one, this another person's ID is two, and so on and so forth. Now in this table, there must be a colon. In the database table, there must be a colon that has um, unique item, right? Like here now, we can have another Joseph. We can have another Joseph. We could also write a form or a database such that if we had a username, only one username can be. We can also restrict the property of this table in the database such that only one Joseph can appear on this column. And if someone tries to register with another Joseph, we can able to make the person know that Joseph have been taken, which you will see in some website will say, oh, this username is already taken, choose another one because it exists in the database. You could also make a database where you could have the same names, right? But by and by, there must be a column in your database that is unique. Only that each person has a data that another person cannot have. So one way is to have an ID column, unique ID, which is numeric, and it is set up by maybe when the person enters into the database. So the first person can have an ID of one, the next person can have an ID of two. This ID of one, only this person has it. This ID of two, only this person has it. Some databases, the um, unique column might not be ID. It could be something else like phone number. You know, our phone numbers are not they are unique. Again, our email addresses are unique. Only us is supposed to have the same email address. Nobody should have it again. You can use that to become your what in database called the primary key. And that helps querying the database so that anytime I say give me the entry with ID number two, it must bring this particular this thing. So this is just how a thing is structured, somehow like this in the database, and you keep having different entries. Your database keep growing as people sign up, or yeah, and they have a lot more entries. Now there's what we call the SQL. SQL is what we use to query this kind of structured database. right? It's a language, just like we say Python is a language. SQL stands for Structured Query Language, used to query SQL databases. But we are not going to be learning it now in this course. SQL on its own is something to be learned, separate course. You understand how to write an SQL database to query, language to query an SQL database, get information from the database, add information, delete information. Now, when this is what I'm saying, there are four major operations in a database. So we call them CRUD operation. CRUD now, C stands for create, arrow, read, U, update, D, delete. These are the operations we are going to be carrying out in the database. You should be able to create an entry. You should be able to read the entry. You should now also be able to update the entry and you should be able to delete it. Could perform CRUD operations in your database. Majorly, we use SQL statement to do all this. But now, when you're working with Python in this with Flask too, you can use what we call an ORM, Object Relational Mapper. Okay. Now, to begin with, for database, we are going to set up a database. The type of database we'll set up is SQLite. SQLite. This SQLite is a very small database that we can easily install. There are other types of database. There's Postgres, and there are many others. But we'll just use this small one. The same setup we'll do for this is how you do for any other database you use. Now, when you have set up a database, we are going to create a model in our Flask application. So a model is what creates a table in the database. Now, even though I showed you Excel and say, oh, this is how a database looks, that's just more like how a database table looks. But a database may have more than one table. You can have other tables. So a table is just like that. Now we're going to create a database in our table, and then you'll be able to perform CRUD operations on our model. Okay. Now to create this, we'll start by creating a database in Flask. To create the database in Flask, we need to do three things. We'll create our application normally as we used to do it. Then we'll now do configuration for what we call SQL Alchemy. SQL Alchemy is now the object relation mapper. So that object relation mapper now is what is going to help us to write SQL codes. So which is secure alchemy. Instead of us to be writing all the codes ourselves, we'll just write some Python codes. It will convert those Python codes to um, SQL code so that we can work with our SQL queries so that we can work with our database. Okay, and then we would we'll be passing our application. We'll pass our application into the SQL alchemy class. These are the steps we are going to take now. So let's go ahead. We'll set up the app the normal way we know. So to create an application, usually one of the first things we do is to import from Flask. Import Flask. So we are importing our Flask. Normally we are used to that. Now the next will be from Flask underscore SQL alchemy import SQL alchemy. But now I've not got SQL alchemy installed. So obviously my IDE is telling me that I don't have it. So we need to install this package Flask underscore SQL alchemy. Now we'll pull up the terminal to do that. Let me open my virtual environment. Hmm. Oh, okay. Sorry, mistake. I should just go direct. I thought I was already. Okay, so now I've activated my virtual environment. So I'm going to install SQL Alchemy. To install it, I'll do pip install flask underscore SQL pip install flask SQL Alchemy. Hit enter. Let's see. So now I'm installing it in my virtual environment. It's been installed, and you can see that the IDE has picked it up too. So from SQL Alchemy, we import from Flask underscore SQL Alchemy, we import SQL Alchemy, which is the ORM, Object Relation Mapper, that is going to be able to help us convert our Python code to SQL language or SQL syntax, so that you can then use it to work on the database, because the database is an SQL database. Okay, this is actually simplifying our work. SQL Alchemy is simplifying our work. If it is not there, we are going to have to learn how to write SQL code first before we can work with the database. But because of this SQL Alchemy, we can work with the database easily with our Python code without even knowing how to write SQL codes. It's also a
Sorry,
good. Go ahead.
that this SQA Is it A1 or AI?
AL.
Okay, AL. Okay,
Mm,
that one is small letter L.
yeah, secret alchemy. So now we are still
Yeah.
just trying to set up our, excuse me, application, right? Normal ways we've been doing this, just that we just imported this, which is the new thing. Then we go ahead. Normally we will do this to set up the application. We do that to set up our application. Now we'll configure the application for our, just like we said, we'll configure it for secret alchemy. And this is how we do it. We are going to have some other configurations added like app.config, but now we're going to have this SQL our secret alchemy, everything capital letter, sorry, underscore database underscore URI. So this is kind of like where it's going to be located. We can say in small letter, you can just type this SQLite. I'm gonna call it I'm just thinking of a name that would call our database. Let me just call it site.db. So this is just a name for the database, yeah. And this is just a way of configuring it, setting the location. So whenever we run this script, or whenever we create, there's a script we run that will create this database. When it's created, you then see the database bearing this name. Okay. Then the next thing we are going to be doing is to create database to be equal to, we are going to wrap our application in SQL Alchemy like this. So now we have done the configuration for this with these two lines. So this tells you the location for our database, and then we then wrap this application we created on 25. We wrap it in the database here using this line. Okay, which is what we have now, passing our application into the SQL Alchemy class. This is where we pass the application in line 29. So with this now, we've set up a database, and we'll go ahead, we'll see it shortly. Now, the same way we created a kind of class for form, we're also going to create a class. Now, let's just say class for the database table. Let's just say person. assuming that we have a table in the database that is going to hold information about somebody. I call the table person. So I'll now say it will inherit from db.model. Now this db.model is kind of so under OOP we have class attributes and methods. So this is like a method under DB because DB now is now like instance of SQL Alchemy. So from DB you inherit db.model to help you with this creation of the database. So for our database, we'll then go ahead to create the database columns. So one column could be an ID, and we can say ID equal to db.colon. Now this is going to be db.integer because it's going to be an integer, and we'll call it the primary key. Remember what I said about a database table when I was sharing Excel? I said that every database table must have a primary key. The primary key is going to be unique for each entry, and that is the colon that we use to kind of query the entries. So we have specified it as a colon and given it some properties, ID. Now, before I continue, you can actually name your table. Right now, the table in the database will be called puppies. I'm sorry, person. It will be called person. But if we want to give it our own name, let's just say we want to call it person table. Person table. That's the name we prefer to call it. We can set that. Why did I say it to be called person? Is because the name of the class is person. So automatically the name of the class is going to be the name of the table in the database, but you can change it using a class attribute. And that class attribute is underscore underscore table name underscore underscore equal to, I can then say person table. So in the database, it will be called person table. But if we don't do this line of code, it will be called the same name as the class. So let's follow that and I just say let me show that. Let me make it a comment and then we continue. But if you want, you could name your own table, whatever you want using that line. Now, this is the first column, ID. The next column we want is say name. And we can say equal to db dot colon, and this could be a text, so say db dot text. Now we could still add other properties. We can add properties like to make sure that it cannot be empty, then something must be provided. So that's where you say something like nullable. Let me just put it. You could say like instead of db text, since it's just a name, I can call it db string. And we can give it number of characters if we want. Something similar to how we are specifying properties for a form. Now we are specifying properties for a database table. We could say, okay, the name should be 20 characters, and we can say null label equal to false. When we use null label equal to false, what we are saying is that it cannot be empty, right? So if you try to create an entry in our database, then this particular column must have a data. And that's one thing you can do in a database too. You can have a database that takes in people's information. Let's say you're signing on to a website, you also find out that some information is optional. Maybe if the person does not supply a phone number, no problem. But then the person must supply a name, so it can't be empty. It will raise an error if it's empty. The person must supply maybe an email. So we go ahead and create an email. Same thing, db colon, and this will be a string. Let's say your email should not be more than 50 characters, and we could say nullable. But let me just leave it. So if you don't supply an email to the table, it's not also going to be a problem. So we could now also add one more. We could just say, okay, the person's age. We can just say db colon. This should be an integer. So you can say what your age is. So with this now, we have created the major attributes. We can always create also an init method for this class. And this init method will accept name, email, age. Name, email, and age. Then we'll just say self dot name equal to name, self dot age, email equal to email, self dot age is equal to age. So we've set up our init method for this class. So whenever you want to create an instance of this class, maybe a person that you're going to store in the database, you must supply the name, the email, and his age. Now, we have successfully created a database class, or what we call a database model, a database table. This table is going to be in our database. We've also created the database and then wrapped the application with SQL Alchemy for it to help us with the heavy loading of moving things into our database. Now let's save the file and create another file that we'll use to set up the database. So I'll create a new file, db setup.py. Now the database is created in basic db.py, and I want to use db setup to set it up. So because of that, I'll import it. So I say from basic db import. I need to import the database, and I need to import person, which is the person we are going to be putting in the database.